I have watched enough people move through their 50s and 60s to recognize the mistakes that look most like responsible behavior. These are not the obvious errors. They are the ones that feel right while they are happening, that feel like protection and care, and that show up as costs a decade later, 5 of them. And I made several of them myself. The body after 50 operates differently than it did at 40. Most people apply the same instincts they carried from their younger years and get worse results than they expect. The instincts are not wrong. They have just become misapplied. Mistake 1. Resting more to protect the body. The instinct makes sense. After decades of hard use, it seems responsible to protect the body rather than push it. The joints have wear, the recovery is slower, the energy is not what it was. Going easier feels like the appropriate response to all of this. The problem is that after 50, the body interprets reduced demand as a signal. Not a signal to rest and recover, a signal to reduce its investment in maintaining what is not being used. Muscle, bone density, metabolic rate, and cardiovascular capacity all respond to loading. They maintain when stressed and diminish when they are not. The appropriate response to physical vulnerability after 50 is not protection from demand. It is carefully calibrated demand. Specifically, resistance training, the one input the body after 50 needs most, and most people reduce or eliminate because it feels like too much. The people I watched rest their way through their 50s arrived at 65 with a significantly diminished baseline, not from aging, from the response to inactivity. Mistake 2. Eating less without eating better. The metabolism does slow after 50. The instinct to eat less in response is a reasonable one. The problem is that eating less without changing what is eaten produces a nutritional deficit rather than a nutritional improvement. After 50, the body becomes less efficient at using dietary protein to maintain and build muscle. It needs more protein, not less, to achieve the same muscle maintenance effect. It needs the specific micronutrients that support bone density, cardiovascular function, and cognitive health with more precision than at younger ages. These needs do not decrease when the caloric intake decreases. Most people after 50 reduce their food intake and reduce it proportionally across everything they were already eating. The result is a person eating less of the same food, less of the nutritional gaps, and less of the nutritional supports in equal measure. A smaller portion of the same food produces a smaller version of the same nutritional profile. The body is now underfed and still insufficiently nourished in the specific ways that matter most after 50. Mistake 3. Accepting disrupted sleep as normal. Sleep does change after 50. The architecture shifts. Lighter sleep, more frequent waking, less time in the deep restorative phases the younger body spent more time in. This is real and not imagined. What most people do is accept these changes as simply how sleep is now. They accommodate shorter, lighter, more interrupted sleep without making any systematic attempt to address it. The consequences of poor sleep after 50 compound more severely than at younger ages. Cognitive function, metabolic regulation, cardiovascular health, and immune function are all materially affected by sustained sleep insufficiency. The body after 50 has a reduced capacity to compensate for the debt. The change in sleep architecture is real. The acceptance of it as permanent and unaddressable is the mistake. Consistent sleep and wake times regardless of the day, a dark and cool room, no alcohol within 3 hours of sleep, no screens in the hour before. These are not complex interventions. The difference between the person who applies them consistently and the person who doesn't is meaningful at 70. Mistake 4. Avoiding the doctor because nothing feels wrong. The logic is understandable. If nothing feels wrong, there is nothing to address. The appointment feels like an errand with no purpose, or worse, an occasion to discover a problem that would otherwise have stayed quiet. The specific problem with this logic after 50 is that the conditions which most commonly become serious in the late 60s and 70s, elevated blood pressure, pre-diabetic blood sugar, elevated cholesterol, early cardiovascular changes, produce no symptoms in their early and most treatable stages. the person feels well, the condition is developing. By the time these conditions produce symptoms, they have typically been developing for 5 to 10 years. At that point, the treatment options are more limited and more invasive than they would have been at the beginning. Regular monitoring after 50 is not an act of anxiety. It is the appropriate response to the specific way post-50 health problems tend to develop, silently, over years, in the gap between how the body feels and what it is actually doing. Mistake 5. Keeping the same cardio routine from their 40s. Maintaining an exercise habit past 50 is genuinely valuable and genuinely uncommon. Most people do not do it. The person who walks 5 days a week, who runs, who cycles, they are doing something that matters and that most people around them are not doing. The specific problem is that cardiovascular exercise done alone does not address the primary mechanism of post-50 physical decline, the accelerating loss of muscle mass. After 50, the body loses muscle at roughly 1 to 2% per year without specific resistance stimulus. Cardiovascular exercise does not provide that stimulus. The person running 5 days a week in their mid-50s is maintaining cardiovascular health while their muscle mass, bone density, and metabolic rate decline at the rate the body defaults to without resistance training. The exercise feels like enough. In the most important sense, the one that determines functional capacity at 70, it is not. The correction is not to replace the cardio. It is to add 2 sessions of resistance training per week. The cardio and the resistance together address what the cardio alone cannot. I'm not describing these things because the damage is done. I'm describing them because they are reversible. Most of them with relatively modest and consistent changes in behavior. The body after 50 is not a declining thing to be managed carefully toward its end. It is a system that responds to the right inputs with genuine capability. These are the 5 places most worth starting.